Welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast, where we're working to help you call a truce with your anxiety. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here's your host, Elizabeth Cush, LCPC.
Welcome back to the Woman Worriers podcast. I appreciate your tuning in and listening and subscribing. So I am grateful to all of you listeners for being a part of this experience with me because it has been so meaningful to hear from you, to hear your suggestions, and to get the feedback. Today, my guest is Linda Roszak Burton. She is the founder and president of DRW Incorporated. Her company supports the development of leaders and teams to overcome conflict, gain control of overwhelming pressures and daily challenges, thus leading to greater productivity, satisfaction, and success. As an executive and team coach, Linda combines best practices in leadership development based on the latest research in positive psychology, contemporary neuroscience, and performance coaching. She supports various research initiatives related to employee engagement and building a healthy and positive work environment. Most recently, she completed a gratitude intervention study with staff in a senior living community, resulting in increased employee engagement and greater meaningfulness in work. Linda is the author of Gratitude Heals, a journal for inspiration and guidance. She serves on multiple boards and committees, including the Maryland Governor's Wellmobile Advisory Board and the Cool Kids Campaign. Linda is a credentialed executive coach through the International Coach Federation and a certified brain-based coach through the Neuro Leadership Institute, a licensed positive psychology instructor, and a member of the Institute of Coaching at McLean Hospital, which is a Harvard Medical School affiliate. Linda and I are going to be talking about the practice of gratitude, how it can help rewire your brain, and about her journal, Gratitude Heals. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Linda. Welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me.
If you don't mind, before we get into this wonderful topic about gratitude, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself and what has inspired you to do the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to. I have a very research-based coaching practice. And we really look at the last 2 decades of research in positive psychology, contemporary neuroscience, and even more so now in gratitude. And so what's inspiring to me when we frame it from a strength-based approach, which is what positive psychology really is defined as, that I'm working with individuals and teams and leaders to be at their best. So we always start with a conversation about their strengths when they're at their best versus starting out with where they're weak and from there. Because we'll never really achieve our greatest potential if all we do is look at what we're not good at and completely inhibit the gifts that we have that have been given to us. So my personal practice of positive psychology and what they consider the character strength of gratitude really started me on my own journey of practicing gratitude in a very sustainable way. I never thought I was an ungrateful person, but never really paid the attention to it that I think a really healthy practice is able to provide to us.
Mm.
So not only does my work with individuals inspire me, the research and the impact it's had on my life is inspiring, and welcome this opportunity to share this with your listeners.
Mm. Well, it's interesting you talking about the strength-based perspective and focusing what you're already good at. But we're so good at looking at what we're not good at that sometimes we forget to pay attention to the more positive parts of life, but also of ourselves.
Yes. Well, think about what's all around us every day, that there is negativity, and we are hardwired to look for problems. We're actually great at solving problems. When we cultivate only those negative experiences, we get more negative experiences. We get more of what we pay attention to.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful to, I think, also frame this conversation around the definition of gratitude, which is an affirmation of what is good in our life and a recognition of the goodness that's outside of ourselves. And so it is all around us. Everyone is capable of feeling grateful, being in a state of gratitude. But there are lots of disruptions. There's lots of ruminating, if you will, on what's working well. That kind of we bypass the that awareness of really what really is good in our life and in our surrounding environment. Absolutely.
Well, and also you talked about your own practice of creating more, of being mindful of the things you're grateful for. And I think I was just talking to a client yesterday about, mindfulness, being present with what we're grateful for. It's not something we're hardwired to do, that we do have to practice this to bring it into our lives in a meaningful way, and in a lasting, like you said, sustainable way.
Yes, absolutely. It's not just a parting thank you for your time type of thing. It really is a very mindful approach to the positive emotions that we feel. What kindness has someone shown us recently? And so it is the practice. It's the true definition of practicing something until it becomes a routine, a habit.
Right.
And it's a normal way of looking at our world, because the normal way of looking at our world from our hardwiring perspective is that we are looking for, how do we survive? Back to, there's no more saber-toothed tigers, but there still are threats and fears that we combat all the time, every day.
Well, and the sort of everyday of living have become our new fears that we react biologically the same way as if it was a saber-toothed tiger, but this is just everyday living.
Absolutely right, Elizabeth.
Yeah. So how can gratitude, like as you said, that we do get stuck in this sort of ruminating, worrying, anxious state because of everyday living. So how can a gratitude practice help with that?
Can I start with a quote?
Absolutely.
There's a gentleman by the name of Rick Hansen, who's a neuroscientist, and
I just watched a TED Talk from him yesterday. Yeah.
He's amazing. His quote is, "Our brain takes the shape the mind rests upon. If we rest our brain on worry, sadness, annoyance, and irritability, our brain will take on the shape neurally of anxiety, depression, and anger." And so we pay attention to, we get more of. And if we're focused on what we're worried about, what we're worried too much about, of something bad happening or having a negative outcome, we wire and rewire our brains so that we find ourselves only processing negative information. Mm-hmm. And that's what the essence of his quote is that's, we can grow new neural pathways in our brain. We used to think that was impossible, right?
Yeah.
But neuroplasticity tells us that, in fact, we can change the way we view the world. The way we think determines how we feel, and the way we feel determines how we behave, how we interact with our environment. Mm-hmm. So it's this cultivation of positive experiences that is at the essence of practicing gratitude. At least it is for me, because it allows us to it puts us in a positive mindset.
Yeah.
There's studies done out of the Heart Math Institute, mm-hmm. where they looked at heart rate variability. Mm-hmm. And so they looked at people that were in an anxious, agitated state versus someone that was in an appreciative state. And in the anxious state, the heart rate variability was very jagged, very irregular. When someone was in the state of appreciation or state of gratitude, the variability was very smooth and even. So the biological reaction is now something that we can visually see when we look at our heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So our whole biology is impacted by whether we're in a constant worrying state or working on practicing more gratitude and present-mindedness.
Right. Yeah, and there's great research out there that shows that when we practice gratitude, and there are multiple ways of doing that, mm-hmm. that we do improve our overall health and well-being. So we have higher levels of positive emotions because we're paying close attention to that. We have greater life satisfaction. There's more optimism in the way we think. Lower levels of depression and stress. It even shows that we sleep better. Mental health, one of the number one contributor to resilience after 9/11 was gratitude.
Wow.
Isn't that an amazing study? Which makes sense. But when we're in this moment of trauma, or at the height of burnout, sometimes we feel that we just can't get to that space where we're looking at what could be good, right? When everything feels like it's wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was really what helped me personally get through a period of grief that really, I think there was addictiveness to how I was only focused on the grief and the loss. I lost my sister to breast cancer just before she turned 41. And then several years later, my mother and father passed away. Wow. And so I was in this definite downward spiral where I would journal, but the journal was about what was missed, what was lost, how unfair, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the pain, yeah.
And my aha moment really came from the interception of my coaching practice and the research on gratitude into my own personal practice, where I physically felt this shift as I look back at those old journal entries, and then I had rewired my brain or created neural pathways that gave me a higher level of awareness for gratitude. It was an epiphany. It was an epiphany. So I felt it, and what better way to kind of bring this work to the world by also knowing that I've experienced what the studies show and what the research show. So a very personal wake-up call for me, but one that really has shifted my entire life.
Yeah. Well, I have said this time and again on the podcast that I feel like the people who are truly passionate about the work that they do in the helping fields have experienced and transformed through whatever form of healing they're teaching or working with or whatever. Yeah. So that they know that this is important work and that it works.
Yes.
So I can just imagine myself, like I work on a gratitude practice, and probably not in as structured way, as your journal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when I do take a moment to feel grateful for even just like taking a walk and feeling the sun on my skin, or something nice someone did for me, or whatever it might be, like I can feel it. Not only does it alter my mood, but I can feel that grateful feeling like physically in my body.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And we're blessed to have some really good neurochemicals that are released in our bloodstream when we are expressing gratitude or receiving it or even observing it. And one of them is dopamine.
Yes.
And that's a feel-good chemical. And I often tell the story about to experience dopamine outside of a state of gratitude is why it's so hard to not text and drive. Because when we hear that chime of our phone that someone has texted us, we actually get a shot of dopamine. Oh, somebody's connecting with me. Have a message. And so it's so hard to not respond. It's so hard to put that phone down because that dopamine is being released. And once it's released, we want more. It feels so good, we want more. But I think when you're talking about walking and being out in nature or being in that state of gratitude, you are feeling the effects of dopamine and also serotonin. So think antidepressant, right?
Yeah.
It motivates us. It helps us accomplish goals. And the good news is that it blocks the stress hormone cortisol.
Wow.
And that's the beautiful thing about how our brain works. We cannot be grateful and angry at the same time.
Oh, that's so funny.
We can't feel love and envy at the same time. Our brain is just not wired that way. And so that's where the cultivation comes into view. How do we create these opportunities? What is the practice that works well for an individual to be able to reframe or reappraise a worry, or when we feel ourselves kind of the anxiety is building, our shoulders are going up to our ears, right? How do we take that early recognition and do an if then? So if I'm feeling this way, then I will step outside for a moment, or I will sit back in my chair and take a couple of deep breaths, or I will actually write down or think about one thing that I have to be grateful for. And so the earlier we do this in the worrying, before we really get into that rumination, the earlier we do it, the better we are at beginning to create that habit of building gratitude into our thinking process.
Well, it's funny because I try to reframe anxiety for clients as like, this is your early warning system that there is something happening that you're worried about, stressed about. There's some feeling that's coming up for you. So maybe say, thank you, gratitude thank you, anxiety, for showing up. I love it. You're letting me know that there's something I need to pay attention to right now.
Perfect. Yes. That is really great. That really brings me back to some of the things that we do know about our brain. It hardwires everything. And so our hardwiring drives our automatic perception. So if I'm going to walk into a room, my automatic perception might be, why am I here? People think I know what I know, but I don't really know what's going to be expected of me. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I shouldn't. It's practically impossible to deconstruct our wiring. Mm. It's much easier to create new wiring, that neuroplasticity. And so when we think about overcoming stress or coping with stress and anxiety, it's that building of those pathways, creating that new wiring that gives us a better way of coping.
Yeah.
One way. I mean, there are, mindfulness is another way, but gratitude is certainly showing to be a very important emotion or a way of thinking.
Well, and you have to be mindful to be grateful, right? Right?
Yes, I think so, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, they're all sort of connected. The mindfulness, the gratitude, the self-compassion. It's like we have to be aware of what's happening for ourselves in order to be conscious enough to create that new neural pathway and do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. And to really to make adjustments and to creating a different emotion.
Yes.
So under stress, we've got certain emotions. When we practice making that shift, then we have better emotional regulation, which is, a term that means exactly what it says. We're able to regulate the emotions. Our emotions aren't controlling us. We're more in control with where we're going with our thoughts.
Yeah. And we can take care of ourselves when those emotions show up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
So tell us a little bit about your book. But before you do, I just want to read a little quote from your book that you are describing, why this is important, but it's also a little bit about the neuroscience. And you say, perhaps you've heard the statement, neurons that fire together wire together. Right. The stronger our gratitude circuitry becomes, the more hopeful we become, the better equipped we are to cope, heal, and re-energize ourselves. So that's pretty freaking amazing, right?
Yeah. Mm. Yes. And, there are skeptics out there that don't feel that they should talk or they should express or share gratitude because it's too soft. Mm. So again, if I had not had my personal experience to work through grief, I would read a sentence like that and think, yeah, okay. What crystals do you have?
This is a little too woo-woo for me.
Too woo-woo. And that's really where I end up going deep into the research and recognizing what we have discovered and what I discovered on my own and what I am seeing in my own work. So I recently finished a gratitude intervention with caregivers. And it's a very, very tough profession
oh my gosh,
whether you're nursing or physicians or support staff, and what there was, what's that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I think that the staff that I was working with were really ready to listen to some of the research in a very adaptable way. And we ended up doing pre and post assessments, Elizabeth, and the employee engagement was at a low of 40%, and we ended up at 82%.
Wow.
In engagement. So it works, and it's only by experiencing it that we find that there is a healing impact, that we can be more aware of the positive emotions that we're feeling versus what went wrong that day and who said something to us that we didn't appreciate. And Barbara Fredrickson out of University of North Carolina has done a lot of research on positive emotions, and she's identified that we actually experience more positive emotions in a given day than negative. However,
I was going to say, sometimes it doesn't feel like that.
No, because the negative emotions, that cortisol that we get from being stressed out or anxious, that's in our bloodstream for 24 hours.
Wow.
So if we were stressed yesterday at work, we came in this morning and that cortisol is still there. If we pile more stress on top of that, well, then eventually we know we're going to have some sort of cardiac
event.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not very healthy for our cardiovascular system.
Right.
Now, so if we are more aware of positive emotions, then we are getting some of those more positive neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin. The unfortunate news with that is that we burn through them very quickly. They don't stay in our bloodstream very long.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So Fredrickson says, let's build and broaden our awareness of the positive emotions that we actually do experience. And that can be a really good practice in gratitude as well, is to reflect on a positive emotion that you experienced, and that reflection is a practice. There's also then a practice of expressing that to whoever supported you that day or did something kind for you that day. Mm-hmm. And that's where maybe a note comes in, or maybe you're writing about it in your journal. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is. I think cultivation is one of the best ways that I can describe a gratitude practice. It's how do we cultivate what we do have in our lives, and how do we till that soil every day, mm-hmm. or every once a week, or so that it becomes a habit of how we think.
Yeah. Well, I liked your suggestion in the book of, that if writing doesn't feel comfortable for you, sitting down and writing in a journal, like draw something, or, imagine that person or that thing that you're grateful for, like picture it in your mind, like give yourself opportunities to cultivate it in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. One size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
But there is, I started to get into a little bit of the research on visual journaling, which is to paint or to just visualize something. Mm-hmm. So there are many ways to approach this. And I do have clients that will tell me, I've tried the journal, I just can't do it. And that's okay. Yeah. This is not to beat ourselves up for something that we think we should be doing in terms of practicing gratitude. It's got to feel right.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your journal, so talk to us a little bit about that and like really what drove you to create this Gratitude Heals, this journal for inspiration and guidance.
Yeah, well, I felt that what I was hearing was a gap in knowledge about gratitude. Mm-hmm. So, if people's going to think it's woo-woo, or it's saying thank you, or, gratitude isn't a competitive sport. It's not about being indebted to somebody. And so I really wanted to take the research in positive psychology and neuroscience and gratitude and put it in a way that it makes sense to the reader. Mm-hmm. And then when we get to the journal section of the book, that we have a really solid foundation about how to practice the art of journaling, or the art of really recognizing what's good in our lives. And so I always talk of four things that are very important when we are trying to get the biggest benefit out of practicing gratitude. And one is to have that mindfulness, to recognize what person or experience or behavior was very meaningful to us. Mm-hmm. Gratitude has to tap into our values. And then once we've identified what we are more aware of, how to very specifically describe why we're grateful for it. So thank you for helping me take care of Mr. So-and-so. Mm-hmm. It's okay, but it's not as powerful as saying, thank you so much for taking care of Mr. Smith. I was trying to stay focused on giving meds, and I knew that he needed support, and you stopped what you were doing and put your focus on him, took care of him, and I was able to complete my medication rounds in a timely fashion. Everybody got their medicine at the right time. Mm. And then how did that benefit me, right? So I was able to get my meds delivered on time. Okay. So it's, what are we recognizing? How is it meaningful? What did that person do in order to support me, and how I benefited? So journaling is, it takes practice. Yeah. Even if we're not journaling, but we're actually, it's what they call interpersonal reflection, where you're not writing it, you're just reflecting on something good that happened to you, to actually go through that specificity in describing what we're grateful for, how we benefited. Did somebody do something? Did they sacrifice something? Did they go out of their way in order to support us? Yeah. And it becomes second nature. It just, try practicing writing a thank you note and hitting all of those highlights, right? Yeah. That is a meaningful note that somebody will read and probably want to hold on or post on their bulletin board or close by so they can look at it from time to time. Mm.
Well, and I think the interesting thing about gratitude, which you were just touching on, is that it's good for the receiver, but who you're giving the gratitude to, that's good for them too.
Yes, you're so right. And I just read some research the other day that they had individuals write a letter of gratitude, which happens to be one of the most meaningful ways. And there is a template in the book for a gratitude letter. It's one of the more meaningful ways to practice gratitude. And in this study, the people that wrote the letter underestimated how meaningful it would be to the reader, to the receiver. And they, there was almost a thought of that, this is kind of silly. This isn't going to make any difference. But then when they spoke to the person that received the letter, it was very revealing how meaningful it was, how it made them feel. And we've got those mirror neurons, right? Yes. So we can mirror the energy that we're giving to each other. And so in some of the studies for employee engagement, if an employee sees another employee expressing gratitude or receiving gratitude, even that observation helps to give us some elevation, gives us that boost that we get from the good feelings that come from gratitude.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember in grad school, which for me wasn't that long ago because I'm a late bloomer, but I took a positive psychology class, and one of the exercises was to write a letter of gratitude to someone, that was important to you. And then not just write it, but you had to share it with them and then kind of record what the experience was like for yourself. Right. And I wrote one to my sister, and I remember she's on the West Coast, so I had to call her. I couldn't do it face to face, but we both ended up we were both crying because it was so meaningful to both of us, and it opened up opportunities to talk about other things, but it was surprisingly moving.
It is. It is an amazing experience. If any of your listeners have a chance to do that.
Yeah.
I think that they will find that just as amazing. And as I say in the book, even if the individual is no longer alive, to read it to someone who really knows you well, or maybe knew that person as well as you did. And we get some of that same benefits from that as well.
Nice. And so there is a piece on writing a letter of gratitude in your book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how do people find your book, or how do they find you?
Well, thank you. It is for sale on Amazon.
Nice.
And all you need to do is type in Gratitude Heals, a journal for inspiration and guidance, or my name, Linda Roszak Burton. I also have a website, which is drwcoaching.com.
Okay.
And DRW, Elizabeth, those were my sister's initials.
Oh, nice.
So I keep her with me constantly.
That's lovely.
Yeah. And so on my website, there's a lot of resources and some of the research available for people that are interested. And you can also link to the book from the website as well.
Nice. And I know you, within the book too, you have some resources on positive psychology information.
There are websites and books that are just very helpful. You might look at something and want to go deeper into maybe some of the work on positive psychology, or some of the work on gratitude. And so those resources are there for you to dig deeper into some of this.
Mm-hmm.
And books that I have found very, very helpful to support the practice. And so that I hope that they are helpful to the readers as well.
Awesome. Well, Linda, I just want to say thank you so much for, one, sharing your personal experience, but also just giving us more information about why a great gratitude practice is so important.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. I am grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you today and hopefully share this information with your listeners and have them leaning forward into using this as a coping mechanism and helping them with their stress and worries and anxiety.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening to my interview with Linda. I really so appreciate when my guests are willing to share some of their personal stories and how they've created meaning out of those stories in positive ways. And then sharing their expertise with us around their specialties. So learning more about the practice of gratitude and how it can change and rewire your brain and create new neural pathways, but also the neuroscience around dopamine and the positive feel-good chemicals and why gratitude helps create more of those. So I hope you all have a terrific week practicing gratitude, bringing more gratefulness into your life, getting those new neural pathways started, get the dopamine and serotonin flowing. I will include in the show notes links to Linda's book as well as other resources we mentioned in the podcast. Have a wonderful week. Ciao for now from this Woman Worrier.
Thanks for listening and subscribing to the Woman Worriers podcast. Music was written and performed by Andy Cush. If you'd like more information on this episode, you can find the show notes, the resources shared today, and links to the guests' profiles at womanwarriors.com.